first thought that comes to mind is that you're not easily defined, or it's not easy to put you in any box, because you are designer, writer, and entrepreneur, at least these three. And you are CEO of MAQE and the editor of Work Matters, which is a weekly newsletter. And you are into your 5th year of life, and it's a newsletter that talks about agility, innovation, and leadership. You are originally from Sweden, and you spent a few years working in the Silicon Valley before, in 2009, moving from, I think, Seattle to Thailand. Without any further ado, the stage is yours, and have a great presentation.
Thank you, Ricardo. So, and thank you everyone for calling in. I know the time zone things for those of you in Europe. Thank you for calling in so early. I appreciate it. I have a tendency to go off track sometimes when I do this talk. So if I'm going to try to keep it at 30 minutes, but it might be a little bit longer. We'll see. But before we begin, I wonder if I can get your thoughts on a few questions. So if you haven't already, have I shared my screen yet? No, I haven't. I have a little bit of a Menti poll for you. So if you go to menti.com and type in the code 2573 1427, just to see if you guys have heard about Rendanheyi before and how much you know about it. And that way I can adapt my talking points a little bit for you. So I'll let you fill that in. I will also, before I start my presentation, give you a little bit of an introduction to some of the companies and the person that you're meeting today. So we'll talk a little bit about Hire, a very large multinational organization, producer of consumer electronics all over the world. They have all the right to be famous, but maybe for our intents and purposes here, we can talk about them because they are creators of this thing called Rendanheyi, which is an organizational model and philosophy. They are a very large company, 100,000 people, revenue $37 billion. So this is scale, right? And Rendanheyi is actually the evolution of a organizational philosophy that they've had since the very beginning, but it's gone through some very distinct phases. I think 5 up to this point. So Rendanheyi is the current one, and it's built on these tenets: zero distance, about having a zero distance between the employee and the customer; de-intermediation, which is a fancy way of saying get rid of all the managers, which Hire actually did 10 or so years ago. They did away with 12,000 middle managers in one fell swoop and lived to tell the tale. And decentralization, which you guys will be familiar with already, but unbundling the organization into its components parts. So we'll talk about Hire in terms of how they're organized and their philosophy we called Rendanheyi. The next company is MAQE, which is the company that I'm here representing. So MAQE, pronounced MAQE. Long story, you can ask me later if you want. A small professional services firm, primarily in Thailand. We design and build primarily commerce solutions for primarily big organizations, primarily in Southeast Asia. 85 people, we've been going for about 10 years. And in terms of revenue, we're almost as big as Hire, almost someday, maybe. A lot of work to do there, but we're having a good go at it. We have been experimenting a lot with new and better ways of working throughout the years. Teal, Holacracy, Sociocracy, Beyond Budgeting, Semco, you name it, we probably looked at it because we want MAQE to be a place where people can do their best work. But it's all in the pursuit of these 3 values that you see below: personal fulfillment, customer value, and organizational effectiveness. And I'll refer back to these things as we go along. And the last one is me. And Ricardo, you already introduced me a little bit. So the only thing I say here is that I find inspiration in a lot of different places. I'm a bit of a science nerd. I find a lot of inspiration in the new work movement from reading Laloux's book back in the day to the more newfangled stuff going into DAOs, etc. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. But also, since I have one foot in the tech world, looking at how Silicon Valley builds startups, right? There's a lot to learn there too. So there's a bit of creative tension between these things sometimes, but if you ever read something I write, there's also always these two things sort of battling against each other. So that's a little bit about me. Let's have a look at what you guys thought about Rendanheyi. I'm going to switch over to the Mentimeter here. And so we can see that there is some familiarity with Rendanheyi. I'm happy to see that you guys think that it might be compatible, because that could be a bit of tension otherwise as well. We're interested in adopting it, interesting, and I'm very glad that you're enjoying your time at TL around the world. So very good. I will try to, as we go along, then elaborate a little bit more on the components of Rendanheyi. I'll mostly focus on our story, but I'll add in some colors as we go along. And if you have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. I'll have the chat open so I can adapt as we go along. But okay. The talk for today, outside in, and the problem statement, how and why a technology services firm in Thailand is using Rendanheyi to build resilience and optionality. I'll explain those words in a little bit, in pursuit of personal fulfillment. So it's a valid question, right? Because I just said that Hire and MAQE are very different. Hire is really big. It is a product company. MAQE is very small. We're a services firm. There's maybe more differences than similarities. So why would we go about adopting Rendanheyi? And that story actually begins, or the answer, I should say, begins with the three values that I mentioned early on. And I'm going to try to explain to you the why of doing this, the how, and the what. And we'll start with the why and the three metrics that I mentioned. So personal fulfillment, customer value, and organizational effectiveness is what we call the MAQE trifecta. And the trifecta goes back years. It's how we define success at MAQE. We've always thought that being a successful organization means more than just being profitable. It means being able to maximize these three values in unison. We can't spend all our time on personal fulfillment at the expense of customer value, or vice versa, right? We have to do all three all the time. And again, we find some creative tensions there, right? So we have tried to measure and track these things for the past couple of years, and we've had a good go in the fulfillment space. We're generally pretty high. Organizational effectiveness, yes, our build processes, design processes are very solid. Profitability could be improved. Customer value, most customers are happy, but not always. And so as we looked around for ways to take the next step and become better, Rendanheyi arrived on the scene back in 2020 for us, I mean. And we chose to adopt it officially in 2021 because we felt like this is something that can help us tackle all three of these metrics at the same time. The personal fulfillment piece in Rendanheyi is absolutely there because Rendanheyi is all about unleashing the potential of the individual. The organizational effectiveness is definitely there because Hire has managed to achieve autonomy at a scale unheard of before, I believe. For those of you who don't know, Hire is organized into 4,500 micro enterprises that are fully autonomous, and yet somehow they manage to build and deliver smart fridges to your doorstep, basically, and they do so effectively. So they definitely have the organizational effectiveness down. But then the customer value part, which was so important for us, because I think this is where we had a lot to learn. Rendanheyi is absolutely 100% focused on customer value, and customers in the focus of everything, right? So we saw in Rendanheyi a path forward for MAQE and the trifecta. And I should add too, actually, that the fact that Rendanheyi is born and proven to work in Asia has been important for us too. It's part of the overall narrative that we could tap into, right? I can talk more about this later, maybe, but it's a very useful part of the story for us. So Rendanheyi is more maybe a philosophy than a organizational system. If you're familiar with holacracy or sociocracy, or maybe especially holacracy is pretty prescriptive, right? Like, this is how you do things, this is how you define roles, this is how you run meetings, etc. Rendanheyi is not like that at all. At its core, it has these three values, and it basically asks you to interpret it the way you can based on your context. And so what we did, we have done over the time that has passed, is make our own interpretation of Rendanheyi and seeing how it can help us continuously improve the values in the trifecta. And what I'd like to do is give you six principles or guidelines that we've sort of distilled out of Rendanheyi. And there's two each for each of the circles. And within customer value, we find specialization and positive sum. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a bit exactly what these mean, but MAQE has always been a generic software development firm, which means that we have been happy to design and build software, any type of software for any kind of company anywhere in the world. And that's fine, right? But we have never really understood in depth the business of our customers, because we are not specialized in any particular industry, etc. And so we thought that, if we can increase specialization, we can increase customer value. Positive sum, you can call it non-zero sum, or more colloquially win-win. Here again, MAQE has been a traditional professional services firm, sort of selling time for money. It's a fine business to be in, no argument there, but anything that we can do to align incentives with our customers to have skin in the game and actually make sure that we are creating this win-win situations for ourselves is another way that we can increase customer value. And this is another concept that is very, very heavily grounded within Rendanheyi. Within the organizational effectiveness part, we've picked up resilience and optionality. Resilience, I think most of you will be familiar with, but it's this measure of how we are able to withstand changes in our environments. Like, can we reconfigure ourselves in lieu of what's going on outside? And as I mentioned, Hire is organized in 4,500 micro enterprises that are wholly independent, so they are very resilient. One can fail, and the others can keep going. Optionality, however, is maybe a bit more of a difficult nut to crack. It basically means to have options available for when you need them. That's sort of the easiest way to say. To go a bit further, we know that every business model has a shelf life. We know that business models are, we know that this shelf life is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter with time. If you look at corporate longevity, it used to be 50 years in the 1950s. Nowadays it's 20 years, and it's predicted to be 12 years in the next decade or so. So business models come and go. And optionality basically means that if you continuously experiment with different business models, you are better prepared. You have the optionality to pursue different pathways if and when it becomes necessary. And this also is a very key portion of Rendanheyi. And then we have autonomy and upside. If anyone on the call has read Humanocracy by Hamill and Zanini, you will recognize those two words. I thought they did a very good job at summarizing Rendanheyi in those two words, and so we chose to adopt the same thing. Autonomy basically means everyone is able to make decisions on matters that concern them up and down the organization. And upside is this notion that everyone should be able to reap the fruits of their labor. Too often, big companies would, create a bonus scheme where the frontline staff is rewarded for the stock price of the multinational, which is silly, right? Because the frontline staff has no way to impact the stock price. So upside basically means that you shorten that distance and make sure that each person has a direct correlation to their upside, the benefit that they derive from their labor. So these are the six the guidelines, principles, core values that we've sort of extracted from Rendanheyi. And what I'd like to spend a little bit of time on next is to give you some examples of what we're actually doing in order to fulfill this, right? And so I will talk about how we're building micro enterprises. I will talk about orchestrating ecosystems, and I will talk about fostering entrepreneurship. And these things are not necessarily, one initiative each. They're more of a group of initiatives, right? But they map very well to the core principles of Rendanheyi. So micro enterprises is a very good way for us to create this notion of zero distance. Ecosystems is a great way of decentralizing the organization, and entrepreneurship is a very good way to de-intermediate everything within MAQE. So we'll start with the building of micro enterprises, and the ME, the acronym ME. It is exactly what it sounds like. An ME is a small organizational unit that has its own P&L and complete autonomy in terms of setting its own strategy, etc. And I mentioned already, at Hire you find thousands of these micro enterprises that collaborate in the form of what's called enterprise micro communities, or EMCs. So multiple MEs band together to form these communities to serve end-to-end customer journeys, which is a fascinating story. I won't go into it yet because it's not part of MAQE's journey. We are way too small to do that yet. But actually, it's something I'm looking into more and more now as we partner with other organizations. But I mentioned that we've been more or less undifferentiated over the past couple of years. And so we want the micro enterprises that we introduce now to be the complete opposite of what MAQE has been in the past. So each ME should be highly specialized for a particular solution, for a particular target audience, particular job to be done, if you will. So we can go super narrow. And the idea is simply this, right? Like if you're everything to everyone, then you're nothing to no one. And so if you can narrow down your scope of work, your market becomes much smaller too, right? But you become much more relevant to that core, and that's a much better place to be. So we want to use micro enterprises to allow us to experiment and find the right niches to work with. And in addition to that, we want to experiment with new business models. So traditional, body shopping kind of work, which we've done some way in our past, is a way to make money, but it's not very conducive to the kind of values that we want to espouse to. So we want to create new business models that create this positive sum win-win, non-zero sum relationships with our clients. And this is something that we're starting to do now, but looking at subscription offerings, like how can we do professional services as a subscription? How can we do pay and gain share provisions in our contracts? How can we use tip clauses in our contracts, just to make sure that the clients feel like we are we have skin in the game, and we have shared incentives, right? So how we do this is actually quite basic. If a person has an idea for a new micro enterprise at MAQE, then the first thing we do is that we help them create what we call an onlyness statement. Like I'll type it in the chat here because. And the onlyness statement comes from this book called SAG, which was written in 2006. I've used it for a long time. And it's just a super simple way to make sure that what you're doing is actually unique. So it forces you to think about the what, how, who, where, why, and when. And so you define all these things, and you put we are the only in front of it, because if you do that and you read the statement and it's, you feel like, well, maybe we're not the only one, then you have some work to do. So just a quick exercise to make sure that you are specialized enough. And once we've gone through that, we go into business model generation. So helping the to-be entrepreneur to think about how they're actually going to make money, who actually is their target audience, who do they need to partner with, et cetera, et cetera. So for those of you who've done stuff like this before, it will sound very, very familiar. So we do this, and then we'll pair the to-be entrepreneur up with a couple of customers so they can get feedback, and then they're off to the races, basically, to set up their own micro enterprise. And that actually leads me into the next part of this whole equation, which is what I call the orchestrating of ecosystems. And this is a little bit of a funny thing to talk about. MAQE has 85 people, right? Like, are we orchestrating ecosystems? No, we're not yet. But the principles here are, I think, very sound, and it's something that we want to start thinking about and building now, so that we can actually make use of it in the future. We do tend to think to take a very long-term mindset of this. We think in decades, right, as opposed to next quarter. So a business ecosystem is also what it sounds like. It's a network organization that has a shared purpose. The participants of which don't necessarily have to belong to the same organization, but one of the participants act as an orchestrator. They don't have power over everyone else, but they are the founding member who sort of imbues the ecosystem with the purpose. And the reason we think this is interesting is because ecosystems tend to be more resilient than the more traditional organizational structure that we see today. If you humor me with an analogy, being in tech, we would say that in technology we've learned since a long time that microservice architectures are much more resilient compared to monolithic architectures, meaning that in a monolith, when everything's tightly interconnected, if one thing fails, everything comes tumbling down, right? Whereas in a microservice architecture where everything is maybe interconnected but not interdependent, one microservice can fail, but everything else can continue to work anyway. It degrades gracefully, if you will. And the ecosystem idea is basically that same design pattern applied to organizations. And so that's what we espouse to. We want to turn MAQE from a monolithic architecture into a microservice architecture that is made up of a bunch of micro enterprises that can collaborate and partner with companies outside the organization as well. So to create this boundaryless organization that we've heard so much about. And in order to do that, we have created this lightweight venture program with 3 stages. Stage 1 is incubation, stage 2 is acceleration, and stage 3 is collaboration. That's what we call it. And we're building this out as we go. Currently, if you look in our operating model, you'll see that stage 1 is pretty well defined. Stage 2, somewhat. Stage 3 is not at all, because we haven't gotten there yet. But stage 1 is basically incubation. That's where we help the to-be entrepreneur to do the ownness and to do the business model generation and talk to customers, etc. Before we put them on a path to build their business. And during stage 2, they will have a number of phase gates to go through to release funding. We are not flush with cash by any means, and we're primarily building service businesses. But even so, there's a little bit of money available for marketing and whatever the entrepreneur needs, basically. And then this then goes into the next part, optionality, right? Because if we're running a venture program, this gives us the opportunity also experiment with these new business models so that we build optionality over time. So if and when our core business models runs out of favor, then we have other things to capitalize on. And so optionality is built into the process, so to speak. So Christian, you asked how we help the MBs getting started. It's basically this process. So Currently, there's a couple of people within MAQE who are actively working on ideas. They can go at it alone if they want, or they can engage with a group. We call it the venture circle. We're a role-based organization similar to Holacracy. So there's a circle where you can go for help in figuring out, like, how do I actually do an ownership statement? How do I make a business model canvas? How do I do a pitch deck? And we help them with that if they need to. And we have also on occasion brought in coaches from other organizations to give some outside advice. So that's another way we do. So orchestrating ecosystems will help the company become resilient and give us optionality, right? But what about individual people? So fostering entrepreneurship. So I don't know if I need to say this, to be honest, but I feel like entrepreneurship has gotten a bad rap of late, and I guess it makes sense. Like if you equate entrepreneurship with greed and growth at all costs, then yeah, it is a bad thing, right? But that is not at all how Hire defines it. Within Hire, there's a belief that everyone is, or at least can, become an entrepreneur, and Rendanheyi is basically designed to, quote unquote, unleash the individual's potential, and it's a beautiful notion, right? And it's something that we want to aspire to as well. So we want to give our to-be entrepreneurs full autonomy, and that comes in a couple of different stages. So MAQE already tries to give, the every person here the possibility to be self-management. Going into the venture program gives you self-direction, because now you can set your strategy and the tactics as well. And then potentially over time, maybe self-governance can come into play as well if you spin off and become, take equity ownership and become your own company. But for as long as you're within MAQE, you have to abide by our purpose and our core values, and those are not negotiable. Joseph, after working through your micro accelerator, how ready do you expect them to be? MVP, pre-seed, seed? Well, so good point. We, like I mentioned right now, and this is primarily maybe from a funding perspective, we focus on service organizations as opposed to product. So there's not a lot of MVP building to do. The service entrepreneur needs, however, to have a service deck defined. They need to have a service model defined, and so on. So typically, before they can go and meet a customer, it could be as little as a couple of weeks to do that. But keep in mind as well that everyone at MAQE doing this kind of work, they're also working full time on our other projects. So sometimes it becomes a very prolonged practice as well. Someone might be working on their business idea for 6 months before they feel that they're ready, right? We're not at all opposed to doing product in the future. I don't have enough money to fund it myself, but we have talked about actually bringing in outside investment, which is what Hire does. If you have an idea within Hire, Hire will invest in your company if you can first convince outside investments to do the same. So they will match the outside investment. So that's one way to do it potentially. So we want to afford self-management, self-direction, and maybe self-governance over time. But again, this is not all right. We also want our entrepreneurs to have an upside, to have skin in the game. Because if you're asking someone to take more accountability, take on more responsibility, it only seems fair that you also return the favor somehow, right? So we want to make sure that as you take on a micro enterprise and as you go through the journey, there is equity ownership in there for you. You will have complete decision-making rights about everything that's going on, and you will be able to set your own salary. In Hire, you call this a customer paid salary, because essentially it is the customer paying for your salary, right? But it all starts very, very simply. If you scan that QR code there, it will take you to what we call an A5. It's a role definition that fits on an A5 piece of paper. And this is how it starts. Like if you're interested in going down this path, you can adopt this role within MAQE and you follow these instructions basically, and see how far you can go. It's a start of a very long journey potentially, but it starts very simply with taking on that role. So Joseph says, even services need to match the market and have this. Yeah, for example, absolutely, I agree with you. Again, before you can actually go to market, you have to go out and actually talk to a number of customers and get real customer feedback, because God knows, like we have preconceived ideas of what people should want and whatnot, right? And actually, to double click on that point. The first iteration of the venture program had the entrepreneurs present their business models to the rest of the team, and us giving feedback, sort of acting as a phase gate, but realizing that who are we to say what the customer wants? Like, the better to let the customer be the phase gate, right? So in order to graduate from incubation to acceleration, you need to have positive feedback from real customers. We don't expect you to actually build an MVP, but you need to go talk to people and get their feedback and get a thumbs up from them. So we're halfway in already, so I'm a little bit behind schedule, but I'm almost done. In terms of where are we in this journey? So let's assume a transformation is never done, but let's assume that we have this kind of timeline. We're probably here, like we're a couple of year and a half down this journey, but it feels like we've just dipped our toes in. There's so much stuff that is left to do, and listening to people in Taylor around the world talking about how they do self-set salaries and how they do all of these things. Like we're not there yet. We haven't gotten there from a company-wide perspective. So there's so much stuff to do, but there is some golden nuggets here that I'd like to bring to bear. So these are some of the things that I have heard just in the past couple of weeks. So one lady has been working here for about 10 years. She recently went to a seminar on traditional HR legal practices, and she came back saying, like, I didn't realize before, but we are really different. We're doing things completely different from what most organizations are doing, and so that was it's not a be and end all to be different per se, but I don't have much to compare with. Like I've been in this organization now for more than 10 years. This is what I know, right? So it's interesting to get that kind of feedback. 5 for a normal firm, but 9 for an indie business. This is from an engineer I spoke to the other day, and I had asked him how he thought we were doing as an organization. And I thought his answer was very interesting. And basically what he said that, a traditional profit-focused organization, if we were that, I would give it a 5 because we are not profitable enough. But because of our values, because of how we operate, I give it a 9 because this is better, right? And so, on the one hand, I don't actually want him to give us that flexibility, that freedom, but like we should abide by the same principles as any other organizations. But it's just interesting how, the thought process that went behind it. If you go down this path, I'll stay here forever. That is from a direct quote from the ME owner who runs our one of our MEs currently. So made my day, that one. You really make an impression on candidates. This is from our recruitment partners. We maybe unlike some of the other companies down here, we talk about micro enterprise, we talk about fulfillment, we talk about entrepreneurship when during the hiring process, and that makes us stand out, and that is a good thing, right? I don't know if you guys are aware, but Bangkok is a very competitive market for talent. It's very difficult to find designers and engineers, and so this is really, really useful. no one else would give me this freedom. This is actually from a few different people. We are a largely distributed organization. We do have offices, but most people work from home. You can work part-time if you want, etc., etc. As long as the customer is happy, I don't really care. And there's a lot of good feedback on that part as well. So Breeze, you asked about pain points. So perfect timing. So I'm showing you voices now that are all positive, but it's not all positive, right? There are some bad things as well. So I've highlighted a couple of them here, right? So these are three things that I hear quite often. So the one is the strategy is not clear. Like, what are we actually doing? And you know, when we're talking about Rendanheyi, we talk about ecosystems, and we're talking about venture building. Like, these are this is messy stuff, right? Most people there are head down working building software for third-party customers. They don't have time to engage with this stuff, and so I have to, or the people within my team, we have to work really hard to make sure that we communicate effectively, right? And clearly we still have some work to do in that department, because we have to make sure that the right message reaches the right person at the right time. Even though MAQE is just 85 people, there is so much potential for misinterpretation and you know, lost in translation and everything, because we talk a bunch of different languages in the company too. So that's another thing that's difficult. I just don't see how this is relevant to me personally, and this is actually true. Like, if you are an engineer or designer in MAQE and you prefer to just work on projects, you actually can, and none of this will be very relevant to you for now. But the way we're approaching this project, this transformation right now, is more of an opt-in strategy. If you don't want to engage, you don't actually have to, not yet, but we want to make sure that these opportunities are there for you if and when you want. So currently there's a subset of makers who are actively engaged in building micro enterprises, but the hope is that over time, as these guys are successful in their building, more people will perk up and say, like, you know, maybe I can do that too. You know, it's not, you know, I have good ideas as well. Things are changing too much, and that's a common thing. And again, most people make their head down building software, and you know, I have the luxury of spending a lot of time thinking about these things, and so even though maybe I think that there's a logical progression to all these things, from the outside looking in, it can seem like things are changing a lot. So it's a communication problem, and it's something that we also have to work a lot on, because again, we are maybe a small organization, but we have to speak with one voice, and we have to make sure that everyone gets heard, etc. Breeze, you also asked about how do people prioritize their work to be impactful, also considering well-being. So this is an interesting part, because if you look at sort of Glassdoor reviews of Hired, they work really hard. It can be a kind of a tough environment if you're not prepared to be in there. And you know, once you have P&L responsibility, there's a fair amount of weight on your shoulders, and so it might not be for everyone. And so at MAQE, we've chosen to not force it on anyone. It's actually similar to, if you guys are familiar with Zappos and their market-based dynamics initiatives. At Hire, you're very much encouraged to take on the entrepreneurial path. At MAQE and at Zappos, you don't have to. It's there if you want it, and we hope people will take us up on it. But you can choose not to engage, because the truth is, you know, everyone has a different path and different circumstances. Like, if you just had a kid, for example, maybe this is not the right time for you to build a company. Etc. Or maybe it's the perfect time. You know, it all depends. So we continuously, you know, keep an eye on this fulfillment score that I mentioned before. And so if we see a drop in fulfillment is a impact, growth, and relationships. So it's a combination of those things, right? So in order to be fulfilled at work, there is a bunch of different things that have to sort of align, and we want to be conscious of all of those things as we move forward. And sorry, I'm way out of time now. So last stuff, lessons learned. We have always been very inward focused, focused on our own people, our own processes. And when we first adopted Rendanheyi, we took that approach to Rendanheyi as well, which is not the right way of doing it. There were some experiences about a year in that's got us to sort of wake up from the fog and realize that we were going about this the wrong way. So the reason I call this presentation outside in is that we shifted from an inside out and outside in perspective to the whole transformation journey. So we put the customer front and center. And once we did that, then things started to move more. So we now have one microenterprises up and running. We have 5 of them in incubation, and hopefully within the next couple of quarters we'll be able to have more of them. So if you are like MAQE, if you want to go down this path, you put the customers first. Yeah, you'll be thankful you did it. Start small. Launch one ME, gradually build it out. You can do that if you take an outside-in perspective. It's easier. That way you can celebrate small wins, and then you bring people in as you go along. And then communicate strategically. So people are busy. They don't always have headspace. I want to communicate. I want to bring everyone in. I want to be inclusive, etc. But you have to allow people to opt in, because we're all working on different things. So we're building to think at MAQE. We're trying we're making shit up as we go along, as another way of saying it. And we're seeing what works and what doesn't work. So that's the end. Sorry, that was a little bit longer. If you want to connect with me, Ricardo already mentioned some of this. You can email me at andreas@make.com. You can subscribe to the newsletter, and also if you're interested to talk more about the model you found that I showed on slides 4 to 7, there's actually I'm starting to become a coach, and that model is part of my capstone project. So if you have thoughts and concerns, I'm all ears. You can help me. You can help me graduate if you want. I very much appreciate your input. So. That's that. Thank you very much. Over to questions if you have more of them.
Thank you, Andreas. This was really inspiring, actually. And you already started answering some questions. You took them and integrated into your presentation, which was great. So indeed, let's see now if there are other questions. And as we are not too big of a group, as already people started doing, you can simply put them here into the Zoom chat, and then I pick them up. You could also ask them directly if you wish. Let me start with one, Andreas. I think you haven't covered this point so much, and I'm curious. What you hinted to is before adopting Rendanheyi for your company, you already had experimented with self-organization. My question was about how you actually switched from the previous model to this one and what challenges you faced. So I would be curious to hear a little bit more about how you guys were organized before, and then which steps you followed to roll out this new model.
Okay, yeah, sure. So let's see here. So we had. So I mentioned some of the systems that we had looked at. I mean, maybe the system that has been most impactful for us over time has been holacracy. So we're not a holacratic organization per se, but there are definitely aspects of holacracy that you find within MAQE. So, for example, the circle structure. So we are a role-based organization. We are organized in circles. We don't have the traditional hierarchy. And we're still today. Maybe the main part there to note is, if you remember the MAQE trifecta, the three circles: fulfillment, customer value, and organizational effectiveness. That is actually our organizational structure. Our circles are organized in that system. So there's this notion of single-threaded leadership. So there's one role responsible for each of these metrics. And then you have 85 people working within these circles in order to continuously improve fulfillment, continuously improve customer value, continuously improve effectiveness. The reason I guess we can do that is because Rendanheyi is, like I mentioned a couple of times already, more of a philosophy. It actually works pretty well applied on top of these other frameworks. So for us, it might be a holocratic structure and then Rendanheyi on top. But if you look at a company or organization like Boundaryless, some of you might be familiar with them. They run sociocracy with Rendanheyi on top, and so these things are actually complementary as opposed to not, right? So it's quite useful in that way, or quite flexible, I should say.
Thank you, Andreas. Another question that comes to mind is the mindset shift that I guess is part of using this philosophy, which is very much focused on entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And well, you actually highlighted the fact that no one is forced to become an entrepreneur. You leave it up to the individual to choose if they want to go down that path. I would be curious to ask, so if you're doing something in particular in order to foster a mindset which is very much focused on the customer, and I'm assuming it was already there, but now you're going the next step in this direction.
Yeah. It is an ongoing conversation. So okay, what do we do? I'll make it very practical. So as an example, I have been, and this is something that I do personally. Over the past 2 quarters, I have done a series of, we call them founder skills. I connect with founders in Bangkok, as people that I know, and I bring them in to MAQE, and we have a sort of a fireside chat talking about their entrepreneurial journey, so that the people that I work with here can learn from their example. And what you hear mostly is that, especially interestingly, the people that are more successful, they also have failed more, and it's kind of I want everyone to learn from that, right? Because a lot of times we feel like, well, I can't start something because I don't know if it's going to work, but you just have to do it, right? Like I didn't. None of the people that we talked to didn't know that you can't be sure that it's going to work, and they did fail. But the difference is that they picked themselves up and they tried again, right? And so we're trying to socialize that and make sure that everyone feels okay with trying. I haven't touched on that actually, but within a hire or within Rendanheyi, you have this concept of UBI, or universal basic income. So as an entrepreneur, if you take up a venture and you fail, you're not fired. You fall back into UBI, and then you're encouraged to try again. And you know, I'm Swedish, which basically means I'm a socialist, you know, so that the whole concept appeals to me, right? Like there's you get the risk taking as well as the social safety net in one, and presumably within, I don't know this for sure, but if you fail and you do the exact same thing again and you fail again, after a while you're probably not going to get more support. But you know, learning from those mistakes and trying something else that's the path forward.
Thank you, Andreas. We have a question from Breeze asking about your personal journey and whether you have experienced any major shifts or I assume moments where you realize something important, particular moments, and what have been more in general your learning so far.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned it already, but I think this notion of, I call it strategic communication, but you're making sure that you communicating clearly is, I mean, I consider myself a writer, and so I spend a lot of time, you know, trying to clarify my thinking. But in an organizational setting, it's not enough to send out an email or mention it in all hands or do both. Like you have to do it again and again and again, not because people are stupid or because they don't get it or whatever. It's just everyone's busy. You have to, in order to be clear, you have to make the same message available in multiple formats a lot of times over time, and only then can you be sure that you're actually making your voice heard. Initially, I would be, I've said it once. Everyone should know it by now, but that's clearly not the case. And I'm still learning. I have a long way to go. The way that I talk, I'm a quasi-academic. Like if I didn't do this, I would probably be doing a PhD somewhere. The way I talk, the way I write is not necessarily the best thing for an organization in a country where English is not the first language, right? And so I have to adapt. I have to change my tack, and that can be difficult sometimes. And again, I'm still learning.
Andreas, talking about cultures, you are European from Sweden. Then you spent a few years in the US, in San Francisco and Seattle, and now you have been in Thailand for a long time. You have been describing us how your company work, and I would be curious to hear how the cultural component plays into this. You are doing this in Thailand. Would this way of organizing your company be conceivable also in Europe or in the US? Maybe you can highlight some cultural highlights in relation to Thailand and compare this with Europe and the US.
Yeah. So I don't think I don't see any reason why something like Rendanheyi couldn't work elsewhere, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with the story. Back in the day, GE went to China and offered to buy Hire and said, it's probably better that we come and take you over and show you how to do things, right? And Hire said no, and GE was like, okay, well, in that case, we're gonna enter China and we're gonna take you over. And we fast forward 15 years and Hire buys GE, which is kind of a turning of a table turn. There's if you listen to people like Kevin Nolan, who runs GE Appliances in the US, he will talk very candidly about the journey that he has gone through adopting Rendanheyi in a North American context, and so it's definitely doable in everywhere. There might be cultural adaptations that you can do, but again, Rendanheyi is quite flexible as long as you stick to the zero distance, the intermediation, and decentralization. You're technically, going in the right direction at least. As for Thailand, I guess maybe one thing that we've had to do here, or we need to do here, is because of how education system is more based on rote learning as opposed to anything else. It's very important to make progress visible and to allow people to see things happening before they choose to engage. I think maybe if I was doing this back home in Sweden or in the US, there would be more like, here's the concept, are you in? And then people be like, yes, like I'm just going to go all in. But here in Asia, maybe it takes a little bit more time to build up that momentum and for people to sort of start appreciating and see, like, actually I can do this myself. But it's very hard to say, because the people who have engaged with the venture program, they're all from this region, not necessarily Thailand, but Malaysia and wherever. And so there are national cultural context, but it comes down to personality too, I think, at the end of the day.
Thank you, Andreas. There was a comment from Travis. Travis says it sounds like it's too early for any MEs to actually have failed already. And I'm curious how you would imagine the MEs to fail. And maybe there is something you can add here.
No, Travis is right. Like in a way, it has been too early. Like we have had multiple MEs fail, but during incubation, and so it doesn't. I don't think it really counts, right? During incubation, it's just like, no, this idea did not pan out. and so you just go back to your regular business, and it's fine. But we haven't put an ME into acceleration yet and see it failed. But the principle will be the same. We would just reassume that entrepreneur back into MAQE's daily operations and keep going. So that's the plan, at least.
So I'm curious if you've got a sense on how many percentage of MEs could fail before it like seriously undermines the other business.
Oh yeah, sure. Oh, that's a good question. The way we've structured it right now is that we have our core business, which is commerce solutions, and we're creating MEs in related but different areas, and so hopefully we are somewhat protected against, I guess, blowback. I don't know. I can't say how well protected we are, but there's a concern. And I forget now actually what the statistics are within Hire, but Hire has published some interesting numbers about how successful they don't have a venture building program. They call it something else, but it's quite similar. And I forget it now. I can see if I can find it, but they publish their success rates. So if we can do something similar, I'd be very happy. But I think maybe it's too early for us to tell right now.
So Andreas, we are at the end of this beautiful session. Thanks a lot for this inspiration and for sharing how innovatively you are actually working in your company. What I should mention is that we have the opportunity to continue the conversation in Spatial Chat. And let me share again here the link. So this is the link to Spatial Chat, and then we'll meet in the Teal Lounge. Within Spatial Chat, we'll meet in the Teal Lounge for those of you who would like to join us and continue exchanging. And of course, Andreas, if you would like to join us, that would be wonderful. This being said, thank you again, and wishing everyone a good continuation of Teal around the world.
Thank you very much.